Hi, welcome to another episode of The Spark. Today, we're going to be talking about diabetes type 2 and some of our solutions for it related to artificial intelligence, machine learning. So we have with us today Anusha Mohan, who's going to be kind of navigating us through everything related to our AI work related to disease, and specifically in this case, diabetes type 2. And you have myself, Marshall McDermott, and we're going to, I'm going to kind of wrap up the end of the conversation talking about some of our disease applications and how we can take the predictions and really put them into practice and really provide insights where health plans and providers alike can use it to impact their business. And so I think it goes without saying that, the first question we should probably ask is, why do we care? So outside of our goal of actually just helping keep people healthy, there's an argument from a business perspective to be made that the ROI for all disease management improvement activities is estimated to be about $2.40 per every $1 spent. So if you think about that, you're getting more than 2 times your money back with every disease management purchase that you make for your own company. And that includes things such as predictive analytics, where you're actually predicting the onset of diseases and then giving those analytics to companies to make sure that they're able to engage with members and U.S. citizens or anyone across the nation to make sure that they stay healthy. And so you kind of alluded to it earlier. There's also quality of life improvement for individuals that do have a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, which type 2 diabetes is actively the most costly disease within the U.S. health system. There's some argument that coronary artery disease and a couple of other diseases can fluctuate from year to year, but from the claims that we look at, they actually are 50% of the population within the membership might have some traces of diabetes type 2, but the ones that have the full-blown diagnosis make up about 20 to 30% of the cost within the claim data set alone. What Anusha is going to talk to you a little bit about is how Lumiata can actually help your organization identify high-risk patients using AI. And we're excited to kind of go down this path and story with Anusha. So, Anusha?
Thank you, Marshall, for the introduction. So, why should we care? So we know that type 2 diabetes is very common in middle age and the elderly people, and it is often is associated with the comorbidities like primary hypertension, dyslipidemia, and obesity. And people with the diabetes is also high risk for developing other conditions like heart diseases, kidney diseases, and eye diseases like diabetic retinopathy, nerve damage, and even stroke. So the type 2 diabetes is becoming increasingly common due to our current lifestyle. So it has become crucial to quickly and accurately diagnose diabetes. So with earlier diagnosis, it will be easier to control it. And we have seen that machine learning has been applied in different aspects of medical health. So it is possible to predict diabetes diagnosis using machine learning. So with predictive analytics, if you use machine learning to solve these kind of problems, we want to make sure that we can get best possible accuracy, right? Because this would help to enhance patient care, timely targeted interventions. The providers and payers can optimize their resources as needed, and also to improve the clinical outcomes.
So let me ask you a question, Anusha. Let's say that I am in charge of operations at a health plan company, and I've got a ton of claims, information about my members, but I've never actually done any ML or artificial intelligence. What's the first step to how you kind of get the ball rolling?
Great question, Marshall. So in order to use the predictive analytics, right, to predict the diabetes onset, the first step should be the data have to be machine learning ready, right? So you need to extract the features or variables to acquire knowledge on patients' health history or clinical history. And these can come from the claims data that includes medical claims, pharmacy claims, lab claims, and EHR. And the key things to remember is that when training a machine learning model, you need to extract the relevant features, and choosing a suitable algorithm to train your model, and also choosing the right metric to evaluate the model that you trained. So we have a set of input variables, and we have a set of output. In this problem, the output would be whether a patient had a first diagnosis during the defined period or defined target period, right? Yes or no. So that would be a binary classification problem. So we will pick a algorithm that you want to train the model on using the data. And you can apply this model on a new unseen data set to get the realistic predictions. So to answer your question, to get accurate predictions, we need to have the data to be machine learning ready. Right. So when we get the data from our customers, our ETL team actually run or perform the data quality assessment on these claims data to validate the data fields. They also clean the data to remove the duplicate, incorrect, or incomplete, and even improperly formatted data fields. All right. So from this point, only the clean data will be passed through the pipeline, and and data quality metrics will be computed at each stage of the ETL pipeline. So once the data is cleaned and processed, the next step is that we pass this data through our data model schema to generate LPR, or Person 360 record. The longitudinal patient record, or LPR, is the place where you can get or find information on a patient at one place. It's basically the summary of a patient's clinical history. So once we generate LPR for all the patients, the next step is the data enrichment process. So we actually pass the LPR through our IP disease tagging system, where we generate the Lumiata disease codes for each condition for each patient.
Interesting. Okay, so you said data enrichment. So and you kind of packaged it as, we take this information and put it into the LPR. We have kind of the history of this patient's information. What does the enrichment add, and why is it important for this problem?
Sure. So one of the key things that actually makes the Lumiata platform stand out from the rest of the machine learning tools available in the market is that we offer healthcare specific normalization that helps to validate the claims data, right? So data enrichment, it helps to generate clinically relevant features. So for example, whether two chronic conditions are related to each other, or if one medication is associated with a chronic condition. So these kind of things, the data enrichment helps to find the clinically relevant patterns in the data that result in the high performing models. So the Lumiata disease codes, right? That's one of our IP. So these are rule-based models. The Lumira disease codes are generated by the rule-based models, and these rule-based models are developed by our clinicians in-house who actually put together the rules and guidelines to define the diagnosis for each condition. Like, for example, if you want to filter out members with the diagnosis, or diabetes diagnosis for a certain period, you can use our model, or sorry, you can use our platform or Lumira disease codes, right, to do more analysis on them after filtering out. So the reason why we do that is because there is more than one way to define the diagnosis for a certain condition. Right. So now that the data is machine learning ready, the next step would be exploration. So as I mentioned, using our platform or Lightning AI model builder platform, you can run experiments for backtesting to train a model and also to evaluate the model performance on a test data set. So you can be confident that your model is X% accurate in predicting members who is likely to get diabetes in the future. And one good thing is that you can have like a flexible target period. I mean, the future can be next 3 months, next 6 months, 1 year, or 2 years, right? And you can actually adjust depending on what time frame you want to target your patients, right? So we offer like a flexible target period, and that's where the Lumira disease code comes in handy, because using our disease tags, you can actually filter out patients who were likely to, or who already got their first diagnosis or onset for diabetes in the defined target period for training or even for model evaluation. Right. So as I mentioned, the way that we actually define a diagnosis is being put together by our clinicians. Some of the examples or rules for diabetes is that we look at whether the patient got an ICD-9, ICD-10 diagnosis code for diabetes in the target period, or whether the patient started taking diabetes-related medication like insulin or glipizide in the target period, or whether the patient had a hemoglobin A1C test that had a value of about 6.5 or above during the target period. So these are the rules that we usually use to define whether a patient is diabetic or not. Okay, so if you look in this slide, I've actually shown you an example of how we set up the experiment when training the diabetes model. This example is for training the model based on patients who got their first diagnosis for diabetes in 2021. Those are the members that we are going to train our model on. So the observable, which is the Lumira disease code for diabetes that show up for the first time in 2021 based on the rules that I just mentioned. And then we use all the data before the target period. So maybe if this patient patient had like 20 data from 2017 to 2020, we use all the features or generate features from that time period to train the model against whether the patient had a diabetic tag in 2021. So some of the features that we look at are whether we look at the demographic variables like age and gender, presence of other diagnosis codes, number of inpatient or outpatient visits the patient had in the entire timeline or in the recent months, number of unique medication that patient has been taking in the entire timeline or also in the recent months. These are some of the features that we look at, and the other codes, like for example, if you look at the claims table, right? These are the codes like CPT, ICD-9, 10, NDC codes, and LOIN codes are the codes that appear in the raw claims table. Right, as you all know that the claims data is like very, very sparse. So using our data enrichment, we actually map these codes into groupers that provide like a clinically relevant features. For example, the line code, the codes from the lab claim, they help to make like a lab interpretations. So using the lab code and the lab value, we should be able to say whether that lab value range is high, normal, low, or abnormal. And we also map the ICD-9-10 diagnosis codes to like a SNOMED that actually represent the diagnosis with hierarchies. And then the drugs, the pharmacy codes, NDC, they are mapped into two different drug data banks. One is RX norm that is maintained by NIH, and it is organized or categorized based on the active particle ingredient in the drug. And the other data, drug data bank that we use is ATC, and it is maintained by WHO, and it is categorized based on which part of the body the drug will be acting on. So these are the groupers that we usually map the raw codes into other cross-coding systems. And we also have the Lumira diagnosis code that were put together by our clinicians. We also use the other risk adjustment models like CMS, HCC models, or HHS HCC models that get released by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services every year. So once we have all these features extracted from the LPR, so it will be like a feature for each code for each time period that we have. And that would result in around 5 million features. So when you convert the LPR into a feature vector, we generate around like 5 million features for each patient. And depending on the problem, so this is here, we are trying to solve the diabetes onset problem. So depending on the feature selection, depending on this problem, we apply the appropriate feature selection algorithms to select the more relevant features for this problem. So we cut down the number of features from 5 million to 30,000 features. And we train the tree-based models on these data, and then we evaluate the model performance on the new unseen data sets. So once the training part is done, we also look at some of the top features that were picked up by a model. So as you can see, some of the risk factors I mentioned during the start of the talk, the presence of the obesity diagnosis code, presence of the hypertension diagnosis code, and age, and the number of abnormal triglyceride tests the patient had in the recent months, and a history of hypercholesterolemia, presence of alcohol dependency syndrome and tobacco dependency syndrome. These are the top features that came up for the diabetes model. So once the model is trained and everything, and it's time to evaluate the models, so it is also important that you choose the right metric when you try to evaluate your model. So since the first time diagnosis for diabetes comes around like 1%, so it's classified as the imbalanced classification problem. So for these kind of problems, it's not appropriate to use the raw curve to evaluate our models. So I have an example here. If you look at the raw curve, I've put like two models. There is not much difference between the model 1 and model 2. Right, but if you look at the PR curve, the model 1 or the blue line was 2x times better in predicting the high risk member than the orange line or the model 2. So the PR curve serves as the appropriate metric for this kind of problems. So whenever you try to evaluate the problems like this, then you should pick the appropriate metrics. So once we have the predictions from these models that you have compared against like other models, the best model will produce the risk score for likelihood for the member to develop this condition in the future. Right, the insurer or the payer should be able to use those scores to recommend the disease management programs for their members that they're covering, or they can also alert the members to promote the healthy lifestyle behavior.
Thank you for that information, Anusha. I think that's incredibly helpful to give insight into kind of how we approach the prediction of the onset of type 2 diabetes, and then diving a little bit into the metrics and model performance and how you would choose one metric or performance measurement over another. So I think where this kind of puts us is we're at a point where we're making these predictions for individuals where maybe they've never actually had type 2 diabetes before. And so it's kind of a radical thing to be able to say, we believe that within the next 6 months, this individual will be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And here are related health issues as well as costs that are to come. And so the question really becomes, how can your organization provide better patient care with our predictions? And what we're really allowing our health plans and providers to be able to do is sort of look into the future for individuals that have a higher affinity for certain types of diseases. In this case, type 2 diabetes, where we're actively able to give highlighting and suggestions where most health plans are going to have a program available for individuals who do have type 2 diabetes. We can suggest, hey, you have a member who is in a pre-diabetic type of state, and we suggest that you go ahead and get them started in these programs so that you can intervene and kind of control their health and control the cost instead of kind of playing the card retroactively and waiting for their health to spiral and for them to end up in an inpatient setting and risking several other types of comorbidities that might come up with untreated illness. And so it's really kind of a two-step process is what we run into in the industry where, we predicted this analytic and it's incredibly valuable. What do we do now with it? And before I go into that, though, and show you one of our applications, I want to talk just a little bit about type 2 diabetes and what are some of the things that you might expect to come up with it. And Anusha touched on a little bit of it earlier. So retinopathy, we actually have the ability, and I think Anusha, you could give an example of how we might do this. Is let's say we had two individuals who had type 2 diabetes, but what we really wanted to know now is which of these is more likely to develop retinopathy compared to the other. And do you think that that's something that we would be able to do with our data today?
Yes, absolutely. So the experiment setup and the inclusion criteria for these experiments would vary because right now we are focusing on members who got diabetes, but who would actually go on and develop the diabetic retinopathy, right? So the training and the test members would include only the people with the diabetes. And then depending on the other features that we could extract based on their treatment plan and medication adherence data set, then you should be able to see whether this patient is likely to develop diabetic retinopathy or not.
Oh, gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you. So there's a couple other issues, heart attacks, issues with feet. These are things where we can actually use, I would think, that same exact experiment set up to be able to say, we predict that this person is more at risk for this specific type of illness. And we should go ahead and pair them with a specialist to make sure that their health stays where we would want it to be. And we can also do things such as diabetic ketoacidosis and actually starting to focus on major depressive disorder as sort of a symptom of a root illness, which we're kind of seeing more in the industry today. So what I want to take a moment to do right now is share a different screen really quickly. What we are going to look at is an application that we use at Lubiata, is called Care Intelligence. And so what we have inside of our Care Intelligence application is kind of, you think of it as this is the front end or the user experience side of all of the predictions and all of the analytics that you just learned about when it comes to type 2 diabetes. So all of the training and featureization of the data to really come down to these high precision predictions is then packaged up into usable business insights. So here what we can see is the kind of a graph that outlines high cost member breakdowns for 2020 and cost over time, specifically the allowed cost for individual claims. But what I really kind of want to focus on here is if I go to this clinical risk tab, and I want to make sure that everyone can see this well. So zoom in on this clinical risk tab and click on our Lumiata disease drop down. I can select several different diseases. In this case, I'll select type 2 diabetes, since that's the topic for today's episode. And what we see here is actually a member identification number. This is all de-identified. This is totally okay for everyone online to see. And kind of a false account number here. And a prediction within 12 months or 1 year time frame with a 43% probability that this individual would be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And the total cost prediction for their claims is $55,174. What we can do here, if we were to click on the member ID, is you can actually scroll over to the left side of the screen. And what we're looking at is a member info screen. So what we have here are the future conditions that were predicted for this member. So 43% probability of type 2 diabetes, along with tobacco dependence and sleep apnea. But those are at a lower percentage, 4 and 2%. So what you could really do is kind of base your business model around, what probability thresholds or something where I might want to engage with a member in enrolling them in a program. You might say 25%, 40% is a good threshold where we would actually start wanting to engage with members around these predicted diseases. What we also have here at the bottom is SHAP values. And what we're really doing here with these values is we're giving additional indicators as to why we thought that person had a higher probability for prediction of type 2 diabetes. Most AI companies out there are not actually engaging in the work and the kind of timely I guess a sunk time effort that really goes into being able to create these values. But what we're learning is that this is incredibly important for health plans to know why are you predicting this for this person. And so in this case, we have a instance of a malignant neoplasm of the pancreas that within the data, the AI has actually learned that this has a strong correlation in leading to an eventual diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. So what I won't go through, but I'll just briefly touch on it, is we have also within this application all the labs, medications, and conditions that this individual has had over their lifetime, or what I probably should say is over the claims set span that we actually have for this individual. But if I go back to the overview screen and I go to member analysis, and this is where I think that the power of the predictions really comes into play here within this member analysis screen. If I were to scroll down, I can find this member here who is a persistent high cost member and who has type 2 diabetes predicted. They've never had type 2 diabetes diagnosed for them before. However, we've got a brief summary that says we have a 52-year-old female with prediabetes and abnormal weight gain. What we actually have the ability to do with our predictions is help health plans and help them with these care and disease management programs develop next steps or suggestions for their members. So based on the detailed kind of information related to this individual and their diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, we have the ability to develop the additional pieces of data to give suggestions that say, based on the information for this member, we think that it's important that you would pair them with an endocrinologist, because we think that that's actually another comorbidity that they have going on, and it's contributing to type 2 diabetes, or it's something that's going to come up. Just like we spoke a little bit about retinopathy, is something that you might see here within the suggestions is that this individual has a prediction for type 2 diabetes. They also have a high risk score for retinopathy. So, we would say, let's go ahead and get them paired with someone who's going to make sure that disease does not come to the surface, or that that illness does not progress more if it actually is already happening. And with the power of the predictions themselves and our wonderful data science team at Lumiata, and our focus on really diving into the industry and doing the research necessary to figure out how we link these predictions to usable business cases to help health plans and providers take better care of individuals, as well as help control costs within the healthcare industry. We've developed these applications to do just that. And with that, that actually concludes our episode today. And I want to thank you for tuning in with us. And if you're on the podcast version, feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to give you a demo of our care intelligence application and kind of show you what our disease prediction and disease management capabilities can do for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.